Johnny had a history of Waylon would open for him or Willie would open. So all those guys. Chris was around a lot. I played on some Chris Christopherson stuff. And it was they were always around and always great to be around. And Waylon was great. He was just, of all those guys, I think I liked him the best. I love 60s Waylon is hard to beat, man. Just unbelievable.
Was he personable?
Great. One of the greatest guys ever. We did a TV show on TNN where Johnny and them did Ain't No Good Chain Gang together. And I was slapping. He wanted me to slap bass, so I did that. And I remember laying my bass down, and somebody came up from behind me and picked me up and threw me over his shoulder. And man, I'm 6'2" and 200 pounds. And he just starts walking down the hallway, and I'm going. And Cash goes, "Well, what are you doing?" He said, "I'm stealing your bass player, son." So, and it was funny and a compliment, Oops, sorry about that.
All right.
But yeah, I liked Waylon a lot, man. He's one of my favorites. There's no doubt about it. I was only around him 3 or 4 times, and the TV show was the closest I got to him, and I was just hanging in the shadows, listening to him and Johnny talk. It was fun.
I got a phone call in 1986, early 1986. I'd been playing for the last 2 years for Dottie West. I was her band leader from 84 to 86. And the phone rang one day randomly, picked it up, and somebody said, "Do you want to go to work for Waylon Jennings?" There was no audition or anything. He said, "Do you want this gig?" And I thought about it for like a second, and I said, "Yeah." So I went to the rehearsal and met him there at the warehouse where he rehearsed, and that was the start of it. Really friendly, yeah. We once we were introduced that night, I remember talking to him for, 10, 20 minutes. And I remember one thing I said to him. I asked him, I'd been listening to the material that I had to learn. I was kind of one of those things where you have to learn somebody's whole catalog. So I was listening down, and one of my favorite things was this song, "Dream in My Dreams." And didn't know who wrote it, but I asked him that night, that first time I met him, I said, "Who wrote Dream in My Dreams?" And he said, "That was Alan Reynolds." And I felt bad later on that it wasn't him, I asked him about that one song, and it was not Waylon's song, it was Alan Reynolds' song. But he was such a song guy and a song collector that I realized later that never bothered him in the least. He was really just into the song. So the band, when I joined him in 86, the band leader was a guy named Jerry Bridges, whose nickname was Jigger. He'd been with him quite a while, 10 years or so. So Jigger was playing bass. Gary Scruggs was in the band. Gary was playing guitar and singing. And Gary would actually do a song like in the middle of the show. And he would give him a feature. Waylon would give Gary a feature. Jennifer Eddy, Jesse's daughter by Dwayne Eddy, was singing backgrounds. And that was Waylon's stepdaughter. And the drummer was formerly a roadie who when Richie Albright left the band a few months before, he kind of just, asked the roadie to play. He knew he could play drums, so he got the roadie to play, and that guy played for about 3 or 4 months, and then he was replaced by Jeff Hale, who had been playing with Tony Joe White. And then I joined at the same time as a guitar player from Muscle Shoals named Jimmy English. And Jimmy English and I joined at the same time. I think Jimmy actually put my name in there to get me the gig. And Jimmy played with him for a year or two, and then he left. And Floyd Domino was playing keyboards with me. There were 2 keyboards in the band at the time. Floyd was a great piano player that had been playing with Sleep at the Wheel and some other people. Kind of a legend, really, in Austin, where he lives now. And Floyd was there for about 6 or 8 months, and then he moved to Austin, left the band. And that was basically it. And we went out on the road and started doing some dates. Jesse would come along most of the time, and that was great because I loved them both, Jesse and Waylon both. And Jesse would come out on stage and sing "Storms Never Last" and "Suspicious Minds" and "I'm Not Lisa." And that was her big moment in the show, was those 3 songs. And as you can imagine, I'd loved playing them. I loved her, and it was all good. I have a funny studio story. We were going into one of the records we did. It might have been a record called The Eagle, that kind of pretty much finished off his major label career. It wasn't a big selling record. It was probably 91, 92. He was still calling me to do his records after I left the touring band. But anyway, I got to the studio. We were already set up. It was kind of the middle of the week. We had the whole week booked. So I just kind of waltzed in, 5 minutes before 10 o'clock. We were going to start, loosely starting 10 o'clock session, 10 to 5. So I came in at 5 minutes till, and Waylon was in there, ready to go. And he goes, something like that. To me, he said something like, you're almost late, Hoss, or something like that. And I said, oh, it's not 10 o'clock yet. And I said, Reggie Young's not here yet. Reggie was playing on the dates. And he said, Reggie's an 800-pound guitar player, Hoss. You're not. And he was right, because Reggie really was. He was that heavy. He's one of the greatest musicians I ever played with.
Did Reggie ever go on the road at all with Waylon?
No, but during the time I was with Waylon, he started doing the Highwaymen tours, and Reggie was doing those. Yeah, it was actually, that was kind of a bone of contention with me, because everybody, Johnny, Cash, and Willie and Chris, they took players with him to do that gig, and Waylon didn't take anybody. And I always thought I should have been the one to go out, because at that point, by that time, I was singing harmony with him. I was singing the harmonies like third above him on the live gigs and playing. And about that time, just before that happened, Ralph Mooney was fired, which is another great story I'll share with you. But Mooney wasn't there, and he didn't replace him at first. So for the last couple of years I was with him, I was playing pretty much most of Ralph Mooney's solos, on piano, and singing harmony with him. So I was kind of, I was doing a lot of work, and I felt pretty important to him on the live shows. And then I was kind of crushed when he didn't take me out on the Highwaymen thing. I mean, I've gotten over it since, but, that was kind of one of the reasons I thought, well, it's probably time for me to leave. After 5 years of touring with him, that's when I decided to leave. But the story about Mooney was in '89. It was actually on that tour that we did for Mervyn Khan. The first date on that tour was in Amsterdam. So we flew over to Amsterdam the day before that tour was supposed to start. And Ralph Mooney flew, we met him in New York with JFK. So we got to JFK to change flights, and Mooney came on with us and flew from there over. And Mooney had a heart attack and open heart surgery like about 3 or 4 months before that, and he'd been off the road since then. So this was his first gig since his heart attack and heart surgery. So he gets on the flight and he starts drinking. I mean, they told him, you can't really drink. You can't drink again, So he gets on the flight, and he'd gotten away from Mrs. Moon, his wife, for the first time since all this stuff happened. So he's like drinking nonstop, all the way over. I mean, he never went to bed. So it was an overnight flight, and Mooney's like pounding down these drinks. And, we're all worried about him. At one point, I went back to use the restroom in the back of the plane, and Mooney was back there. And I said, Ralph, where are you sitting? And he goes, up there in 2A. He was just hanging out in the back of the plane drinking, like he was in a bar. But we got to Amsterdam, and of course we were really tired. We'd flown all night, so we got some sleep. But Ralph stayed he went to the bar immediately and started drinking, and he stayed drinking for the whole next day. And, it was not good. I mean, he was not in great health coming off of heart surgery. So Waylon found out about it, and he said, you know what, you're not supposed to be drinking. If I see you drinking again, you're going to have to go home, because I promised Mrs. Moon, I wouldn't let you drink out here. So he straightened up for the rest of that tour, and for a while after that. But we got to Las Vegas at one point, a few months later, and that's where Ralph had been working before he joined Waylon. He was doing a lot of gigging in Vegas, and he had a lot of buddies from the old days, drinking buddies. So he got with those guys and immediately started drinking again. So Waylon came down from the elevator one morning, to get breakfast at 9 a.m. Elevator door opens, and there's Ralph with a drink in his hand. So Waylon said, you're going home, and that was it. He fired him right then, sent him home. And probably saved Ralph's life for another 5 or 10 years, let him live a lot longer because of that. But that was the end of that, Such a legend. And just such a joy to be around. I actually took a couple of great photographs of Ralph that I cherish, black and white. I was shooting in black and white at the time. I had a really good Nikon camera at the time, and I got one image of him on a ferry going across from Nova Scotia to Newfoundland in April. This was probably, I think this was in '89, and we were doing like a half dozen dates in Eastern Canada with George Jones, and so we got the bus on the ferry, one of these giant ferries, two or three buses get on the ferry, and we're hanging out. It's like a 3-hour crossing across the channel, but it was full of ice. It's April, so we had late winter ice coming in this channel, and we had a Canadian icebreaker in front of us, breaking up the ice so we could get to Newfoundland. And I got this image of Ralph. He looks like, Hemingway or something in his big coat on the front of the ship, and I called it The Old Moon in the Sea. And the other one was Ralph expounding on the bus one night. He's leaning on the counter of the bus with the coffee maker next to him, and he's leaning on it, just kind of shooting the shit. And he's just kind of like he'd been hitting the tequila pretty heavy, and the look in his eye was kind of priceless. Great moment.
Was Richie Albright? Was there some? Did he come back to the band, or was there?
They stayed friends. I forget why he left the touring band, but they stayed friends. And Richie actually produced a couple of the records that I did with Waylon during that time. He co-produced. So they were good. They had a great relationship all the way through.
Did you enjoy being around him?
Yeah, Richie was a kick. Such a great guy. And Gretchen and I actually went to his 70th birthday, I think. Yeah, 70th birthday. And that's one of the last times I saw Richie.
Just by chance, I met Waylon Jennings, and I may have been on his final recording session. I don't know that for a fact, but he was very close to the end of his life, and I was on this little session. What happened was Sonny Burgess and Billy Lee Riley were supposed to record at Cowboy Jack Clement's studio, and I had played a lot with Sonny Burgess, and Sonny had a medical situation come up right before the session, like the day before or something like that, and he asked me to substitute for him. I don't know that they needed me, but I did. So I go to Cowboy Jack Clement's studio, and I record for 2 or 3 days with Billy Lee Riley, and the band was Ben Folds on piano and Gary Talent on bass, and Mark Horn was playing drums, and Bill Lloyd was playing guitar, and I was playing guitar. We recorded for 2 or 3 days with Billy Lee Riley, and every day would start down in Cowboy Jack's office, and he would play us songs, and he would just say a lot of funny stuff and tell us funny stories, and he would do tricks with his cat and stuff, Eugene, and Eugene would come in the window, right next to him. And I remember Cowboy Jack reaching in a file cabinet and pulling out a letter from the landlord back in the 50s. I don't know, he had a swimming pool and these wild parties, and anyway, he was so full of funny stories, and he would say the craziest, funniest stuff. And he had a list of rules, and one was when everything else fails, try getting lucky. And one was, it only takes 3 minutes to record a hit song, and a lot of stuff like that. So I was just having a ball, just being this minor cog in the machine, playing on these sessions. And on the final day, they said, okay, we're going to gather down in Cowboy Jack's office, and we're going to gather around a mic, and Waylon Jennings is going to come here. And so a few different, the Delmonte brothers came, and it was just like everybody that was working there at Jack's place, a couple of his friends. This guy Ferg was his engineer, and there was another guy, a friend of theirs, that was there. And it was kind of toward the end of the day, and lo and behold, Waylon Jennings drives up, and all the guys were really, really genuinely excited to see him. And they all knew him. They all seemed to know him, all these older cats, And but they were excited. Like, he was a special dude, you know. They were excited that he was there. They were really happy, and it was like a really happy thing. And I don't think he was getting around real well. I think he was kind of limping, you know, and had a cane maybe, and that was one reason why we didn't go all the way upstairs to record, because Jack's studio was all the way upstairs, but his office was more like ground floor. And so they put a mic in the office there, and we all kind of gathered around it. And so it's like I'm standing here behind Waylon Jennings, and we're all singing into this mic, and we were all just kind of doing a background vocal on this Billy Lee Riley thing. And tell you the truth, I don't even know if the recordings ever came out or what. I don't know. I think I looked recently I thought, hey, let me look on YouTube and see if I'm on there or whatever. And I didn't figure out whether or not it came out. But so the one time I was ever around Waylon Jennings, I was like singing on a group gang background vocal with him at Cowboy Jack Clement's studio. I didn't really have a conversation with him. The older cats who kind of knew him, you know, they were talking to him more. But I was as close to him as you and me. And I remember looking in his eyes. He had spectacular eyes. They were like really, I think blue, and they were just like, they kind of sparkled, and they just kind of had a lot of life there. And sometime after that, I noticed that Hank Williams Jr. has a song called Waylon's Eyes. I just remember looking straight into his eyes and being like, wow, he's got a strong presence, you know. I saw him probably a couple years before that. I was at Starwood Amphitheater. It used to be a big outdoor concert place here in Nashville. And for some reason, I was out there and I was seeing Willie Nelson, and he had Waylon sit in with him. And when Waylon walked out on stage, he goes, well, I guess I'll save his ass one more time.
At that point, this was 86. I was touring with him 86 to 91. And he was doing clubs. He was doing some of the big clubs that everybody else was doing at the time, Billy Bob's and that place out in Orange County that everybody played. But he was also doing opening. He was also an opener for people like Hank Jr. That was the most interesting dynamic that I ever saw, because when Hank Jr. was a child star and Waylon was coming up, Waylon opened for Hank Jr., right, in the beginning, and Hank was this little 10, 12-year-old kid who was kind of, you know, because of his name, he was getting the headliner thing. And then in the late 70s, it flipped, and Waylon was the headliner. Hank Jr. was opening for Waylon whenever they did gigs together. And then it flipped again in the 80s. In the mid-80s, Hank's, you know, Entertainer of the Year 3-4 years in a row, and Waylon was opening for him. So it flipped around all these times, but, you know, they went back so far that it didn't matter, you know. It was just, and then there were a lot of gigs with Willie, a lot of gigs opening or co-billing with Willie. And, you know, I love doing that. There was a couple times when Willie's band wasn't able to do those gigs, so we got to back Willie, which was kind of terrifying and you know, fascinating at the same time. You know, Willie back phrases so heavily on his vocals that if you're waiting to get a cue of a song you had never played before, and you're waiting to find a cue from Willie to get the next chord change, he's back phrasing so far that you're kind of leaning over going, where is this going? Where is this going? And then he hits the note, so you go, oh yeah, that's it. You know, it was kind of funny. I remember that, you know, that paranoia.
There'd be no rehearsals at all.
Never. And with Waylon, hardly ever any rehearsals after the first batch before I went out with him the first time. You know, there was hardly ever any rehearsals. You know, most of the time we were in the studio doing new material anyway, so we were recording these songs, so we knew them. All we had to do was listen to the records. If he wanted to do something from a new record, you know, we had the record and we had played on it. So, you know, there you go. Yeah, actors. I can't think of any besides Duvall over that time, but certainly, and music people all the time. You know, Tony Joe White would come hang out, or young country acts would come out, and you know, I remember him sitting on a bus telling young country singers, up and coming country singers, telling this story more than once to these people. They'd be up on the bus talking to him. And I'd be listening, you know, off to the side, and Waylon said, you know, Hoss, the hardest thing about this business, you know what the hardest thing is? And they'd say, well, no, Waylon, what? And he'd say, saying the word no, turning shit down, you know? And he was right. I mean, the longer I've been in this thing, that's really true, because your instinct is to go take everything. It's such a kind of insecure kind of business, you know, at its root, that you always seem to be climbing and wanting to stay in the eyes of the public and this and that. So you're taking things that maybe sometimes you shouldn't be taking, you know.
You're told to say yes to everything.
Exactly. Yeah. And he was good about that. He was like, nope, you know, not going to do that. You know, he was a teddy bear of a guy, which surprises people when I tell him that because of the image that he had, but that image was not him. He was a sweet guy, a teddy bear, and you know, I had a son when I was playing with him, and he loved my son Brennan. And when he was about 3 and 4 years old, he used to come out of the bus, you know, on some of the short tours. And so, you know, that was really fun. But he really was, you know, thoughtful, intelligent. He had this innate intelligence and a really great reader of personalities. You know, he had a bullshit radar thing that was like off the charts. You know, he could tell when somebody was putting him on or coming on to him or wanting something from him, you know.
That's a good quality to have.
It's a great quality. And it just came from interacting with people for so many years, you know, and also those defenses that you have up when you're a star. You get really good at your defenses because you have people coming at you all the time for favors and this and that, you know. So he was really good about that. But he could really, really turn on somebody really quickly. I saw a few times that there was a promoter in the UK named Mervyn Kahn, who was kind of infamous in the 80s. He put on these big package shows. I did 3 of them. I did one with Waylon, and I did a couple more with other people in the early 80s. But he was really infamous for kind of like being shady and stuff. I think he later went to prison for some kind of dodgy sexual abuse thing that he was, you know, accused of, and I think he was convicted of that. But anyway, in the this was in '89. This happened. For some reason, Waylon was booked to do the tour, the big package tour in '88 with him, and I can't remember why it didn't happen, but anyway, it didn't happen. And I remember in '89 we did go do that gig and that tour, and when we played at Wembley in London, I was standing next to Waylon when Mervyn Kahn, the promoter, came up to him and was introduced to him and met him for the first time. And Waylon just looked at him, and Mervyn Kahn stuck his hand out, and Waylon just kind of went and walked away and didn't shake his hand. Whoa, that's the guy that's paying you, you know, that's pretty good stuff. Actually, I mean, on the bus, I did see him like quite a few times just go off, and he would get pissed off about something, and you know, if he wanted something, he'd yell at Jessie to get him something, like, Jessie, get me this, get me that. And she would get it to him because she was really good about placating him and keeping him happy and this and that. But the one time when I saw him go off on somebody, and it was on a package on a show where we were opening for Hank Jr. at I think it was Cincinnati, and at an arena, and it was being filmed for a pay-per-view event live. So, but only Hank's part was on the live feed. So Hank was doing a live pay-per-view thing on cable, and Waylon was the opening act, and it was in an arena. And so Waylon, he did like 4 songs, and during those 4 songs, the camera operators were getting their settings to do the Hank part where they were actually going to film, but they were using us as kind of the setup, the rehearsal for the cameras and the blocking and the setup. And after about 4 songs, Waylon was like, "This is bullshit. I'm not doing this anymore." And because they were getting up in his face, and I don't blame him. They were really getting pretty obnoxious and aggressive, and so he just kind of turned around, put his guitar down, and walked off the stage. And after like the 4th or 5th song, so we're looking at each other and we're going, "What the hell," you know? And then he disappeared, so we left, you know. And then I heard later that at that point, the road manager, this guy named Emmett Gillen, was getting the money from the promoter right at that point, and he had his radio on, and so the stage manager was on the radio telling the road manager that Waylon just left. He put his guitar down after 4 songs and he walked off the stage. He got pissed off. So the road manager, this is coming on his radio as he's talking to the promoter and getting the money for the gig, and he hits his radio and he's going, something wrong with this thing, and he quickly turns it off, to stop this conversation, and then got the money. And then Waylon, was in a rage after that, those sons of bitches, and then we all just got on the bus and split, and I think he made his, he made his intention known to Hank Jr. that he was not happy about this situation. It wasn't Hank's fault; it was the production, But the other time was we played at a wrestling match in an arena as the entertainment before a wrestling match. And so I can't remember where this was, Virginia or West Virginia or somewhere. So we're in this arena and we get up there for sound check. And the first thing we notice is that the seats in front of the stage are all pointed away from us because they're pointed at the ring where the wrestling match is going to happen, not at us. So we get up there and Waylon comes out, he didn't do the sound check, which he didn't a lot of the time, but he came out for the show and looked around and the people are facing away from him, like to the side. I mean, like 90 degrees away or something. And he just went, this is bullshit. I'm never doing this again. He did the show, but he was like raging about it later. So that's bullshit. I'm not doing that again. There was no mistake in the fact that the music was the second act was over here off to the side. You were not the main. And Waylon was not used to that. He was not used to being, playing second fiddle to somebody. And, and honestly, who really wanted to be the second fiddle to a wrestling match? I mean, nobody was into it. And I mean, of us, So I think that was the one and only time we did that.
Did Waylon like wrestling at all?
No, he liked boxing. He was a huge boxing fan. I remember him renting rooms in hotels, like not convention rooms, but meeting rooms in hotels to watch like Tyson fights, because Mike Tyson was kind of the guy then. And so if he had a fight and we were on the road, Waylon was gonna watch it somehow, And it was great. We got the feed, we got the live feed. It was usually cable, And yeah, he was a big fight fan.
I've read stories that he was friends with Muhammad Ali.
I think that's right. Yeah. And that makes sense to me, I mean, he had a lot of respect for Ali. He was a total card player all the way. He wanted to play cards with his posse around him. And, I never got into that. That was kind of the long-term guys that had been with him, that wanted to play. But I was kind of outside that circle most of the time. And I wasn't a card player, so I didn't really push that side of him. But as far as what he was like, out in public, people would come up to him for autographs, and if he was eating, he would put them off because that's kind of not cool to do that. Somebody, if they're eating, and bug them for an autograph. He let them know that, but he was gracious with people, and he would sign autographs, whenever he needed to, I mean, he wasn't one of those guys that stayed outside of the bus for 4 hours signing autographs. I mean, more than once I heard him say, look, he'd say, Hoss, my only job is to get up there and sing my songs, and, signing autographs is not part of the job description. But he was kind enough to do it, Well, if you think about a song like Good Hearted Woman, that is it. It's 1 5 1 5 on the bass, 1 5 1 5, all the way through pretty much. And it's driving and it's relentless, and that was it, And between the bass and the drums, it drove the beat and created that beat that became the Waylon beat, the Waylon groove. It's similar actually to Don Williams, to his thing too, because Don's was basically the same thing, but a little bit folkier and a little bit slower, less driving.
Austin City Limits was a big, big deal right around then.
Big deal, yeah. I don't remember much, honestly. I really don't. When I see it now, I I know I'm there, but I just don't have a lot of memories about, except being excited to do that gig. That it was, even back then. We're talking about 30, 35 years ago. Such a big thing. To even play it. They still see that show, and they still tell me that. I mean, a couple of months ago, somebody told me they saw that show. Was that you playing on that thing? I said, yeah. Many, many years ago. Yeah. But I mean, I don't remember details because there were so many kind of gigs like that I did with him over the years. I remember doing like the Universal Amphitheater in LA. That was a great gig. I remember playing the Forum in LA, opening for Hank Jr. That was, mind blowing, really. And it was gigs like the high profile gigs like that I remember. Gigs with Willie, playing his Picnic and this and that, After I left the band, well, I'll tell you the two most important things that ever happened between me and Waylon that I remember that are crystal clear in my mind. One of them was when I went to his house to tell him that I was leaving, and I was terrified. I drove out to his house, knocked on the door, and we had a great relationship. We used to hang out a lot. I used to just drive out there and stop at his house and shoot the shit. But I went out there that one day, and I'm sure he knew that, this was probably it. But I sat down in the den with him, and I said, it's time for me to move on. And I was just like trembling, trembling in my boots about having to tell him this. And he just looked at me in the eye and he said, Hoss, you're doing the right thing. And I was so relieved to hear that. I knew that I was doing the right thing at that point. He felt it too. The other time was, and this happened a few years after I was gone, it was the day Keith Whitley died. And I was crushed. I knew he was because he loved Keith Whitley. So I was out on my way out to my house in Franklin, and I stopped by Waylon's house, knocked on the door. Jessie answered the door, and she said, yeah, go on in. He's in the den, So I went to the den. We sat down on the couch and watched the local news for an hour or two about Keith. And at one point I remember he looked at me and he said, Hoss, that was the greatest country singer ever. He was gutted. He was really, really upset about that death, as a lot of us were. Yeah. Well, I remember hearing that they amputated his foot first, and I thought, well, that's going to be the end, because as alive as that guy was, and as much as he loved getting around and this and that, I thought, when he loses that mobility, he's not going to last long. And it was about 6 weeks later. And then I heard, I can't even remember how I heard, but it didn't really surprise me that much, because I knew I'd been hearing he wasn't well. And, I just knew that it wasn't going to be long. Yeah, but still super sad. I still communicate with Jessie every once in a while. Once or twice a year, I'll send her an email, and she's out in Phoenix. I loved hearing the stories from Waylon about his early days in Phoenix, because he became a star in Phoenix. I forget the name of the club, but it was this huge country club that he kind of took over, and that was the springboard. I think Bobby Bear saw him out there and brought him to the attention of Chet Atkins, and he got signed to RCA in the beginning. But he had great stories about the Indian reservations in those days. And he would always tell me and other people that really he called them the Indians. He said, they kept me alive for several winters. And he would go out and do gigs on the reservation, and they loved him. The reservations like the Hopi and Navajo, especially the Navajo. I played window rock with him once, the capital of the Navajo Nation. And he really had this heartwarming affiliation with the Indians and with Native Americans all the way through. And that song "America" that he cut, the red man is right to expect a little from you, a promise and then follow through. He wasn't his song, but he recorded it because that's what he felt, and he was always so grateful that they supported him. We were out there playing at Window Rock, and I remember he was in the dressing room, and this really big Native American guy with his wife came in. He said, Waylon, and he called him Waylon. And he said, you take a picture with me and my wife. And Waylon said, sure, Hoss, I'll take a picture. And then the guy said, well, Waylon, you got camera? And Waylon cracked up, and he would tell that story all the time. This is before cell phone pictures, Pretty funny. But it was really moving for me to get to see Window Rock and to see the Navajo reservation. That's one of the greatest things about doing those tours with him, was seeing things that I would never see otherwise. He did a fair amount of casinos and then theaters and this and that. I do remember he got the offer to play in Branson, and he played there one time, and he said, "That's it. I'm not doing this anymore." He refused to play in Branson.
It's understandable.
Yeah, didn't go well with the outlaw image. Had to be cognizant of that. But one of the main things I will always remember about Waylon was his embracing of great songs and songwriters. And I really regret that he never got a chance to meet my wife, Gretchen, because he died before we got together. And I always tell her, I said, he would have loved you, and he would have. He was such a champion of the songwriter and great songs. I remember him playing like Kevin Welch songs for the first time and then recording them and things like that. He opened my eyes to that world too. Great songs. I got a song recorded by him once, and that was one of the thrills of my life. And the moment when he called me and he said, "Hoss, come over here and listen to this song. We just cut your song." And so I went over there to Soundstage, and he played it back for me, and I was just like blown away. I mean, one of the highlights of my life. I couldn't hardly contain myself.
I will say that I did have an encounter with him once in the 70s. My friend and I went down to this horrible little joint. We risked our lives to go see Waylon. It was right before the Willie and Waylon phase, So he was still greasing his hair back. It was long, he had long hair, but he didn't have a beard yet. And he had the leather biker bands on his wrists, and the black leather vest. And he was kind of in transition, but he still had the product in his hair. It was long, and they were really good. And we went down there and we befriended Ralph Mooney, the steel guitar player, who was a character, kind of how do you describe his attitude? He didn't really give a shit, about anything. And, but we had fake ID. I had a fake ID. My friend was older than me. He was legal. I had a fake ID. And he dispatched us to the bar to get him vodka and, what was he drinking? Vodka and something. Some mixer. And little plastic cups, little bar, tiny little things. We got him many drinks before they were setting our stuff up, and and the audience was really like a straight white couples kind of place, because it was kind of like a sit down kind of club,
Dinner theater sort of deal.
Not really, but it kind of had that vibe a little bit, a lot of couples. And I remember when Waylon came, we were like, where's Waylon? Is he coming out? And I remember Ralph saying, "Motherfucker's on the bus." And I'm like, okay, I guess he won't be out until the show, And that kind of started a little bit late. And when Waylon came out, all the girls went nuts. I mean, there was like this, you could feel this energy you could hear this kind of collective shriek and gasp through the audience, and some of those guys got kind of pissed off. I kind of got they weren't happy about their woman suddenly having a reaction. to the great Waylon Jennings. And he really did have that sort of, I think that was the height of his sex appeal, you know, like when he's still real lean, you know, and no beard at that time. And he kind of just like, you know, he had this, but, you know, he was great, you know, he was just like, he had that folk element, you know, like folk rock, West Texas, Buddy Holly, country. It was different, you know, it wasn't Nashville country at all, you know, and I always liked his music, you know, I always thought it was different, you know, I didn't see him as a typical country artist, you know, he didn't behave like one, he didn't look like one, his song selection was all over the place, you know, he'd sing pop songs, he'd sing folk songs, he would sing, you know, all kinds of stuff, you know, but it always sounded like Waylon, you know. And Richie was the producer on a lot of those great records later on, you know, in the early 70s to the mid 70s. He had a big thing with the Waylon beat, the boom, 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 you know, pre-disco thing of hitting all 4 beats per measure on the bass drum, you know. And Waylon started doing that whoop, whoop, you know. Like, whoop, whoop. But it was somehow, boom, boom, whoop, whoop, whoop. You know, it's like, what the hell, you know, and they got the phase shifter droning on the low D string on the Telecaster, you know, and that was the other thing, is like, this was before Waylon started hiring other guitar players to play solos, you know. He was still, you know, the next time I saw him was in the late 80s, and I was like horrified, you know, I was like, there was some guy over there playing a Kramer heavy metal guitar through a, you know, like, it sounded like he should be playing in fucking Journey, you know. I was like, what the fuck is that? You know, what is this? Who is that idiot? And why is he playing like that? You know, I was like, what is going on here? You know, and it was like, it's over, you know. It's like, oh, geez. But back in those days, Waylon was a great guitar player, man. He was so good. You know, and you listen to those pre-Ralph Mooney records, and he's basically playing Ralph Mooney licks on the guitar. You know, and he finally persuaded Ralph to join his band, which Ralph did sort of. To hear Ralph tell it was kind of reluctantly, but I think what happened is Waylon enlisted Jessie, Ralph loved Jessie. He enlisted her to persuade Ralph to join the band. And that's how that happened. But, you know, I was working with him one time, and this is after Waylon died, and I was working with Ralph, and we were taking a break, and I said, Ralph, man, those records you guys made, they were just like unbelievable, you know, but just what a mood and what a sound you guys had. He said, well, his music and my music really weren't the same, but I guess we did all right. I was like, okay. And then you listen to Rainy Day Woman, you know, and Ralph kicks that off. It's like every time I've had to pull the car over and turn it up and just sit there and listen to it, you know. I've heard it a million times, but every time it still comes on the radio, I have to stop and listen. It's just like, it's a thing of wonder. It's amazing. What a record. And Ralph is a big part of it, you know. Waylon loved Ralph. I don't think Ralph loved Waylon. But, you know, find a better record.
But I love Waylon's records, you know, and I love that sound. I mean, it's a West Texas kind of thing, you know. It doesn't sound like Buddy Holly's music, but there's like, you listen to something like Well, All Right by Buddy Holly, and it's like do 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 G F G do 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 G F, that 1 and the 7, the 1, that's sort of like, it's got this rocky desert kind of out there kind of sound. And I mean, maybe that was just in the water out in West Texas, and maybe some of it was Buddy Holly's influence. But whenever I hear, you know, Waylon records where, you know, and it's such a stripped down sound, I know that Holly was always so much about, you know, you don't need a lot of people to make a record. You just need like 3 or 4 guys, and you don't have to have fills. You can just let the rhythm guitar be the focus and let that be the solo. And Waylon definitely, you know, he must have learned a lot from that brief little little moment that he was working with Buddy, because I hear a lot of not obvious, but kind of third layer of the onion type deep down in it little things that make me think that influence stayed with him the whole time. It's kind of a product of its time when you think about that. Music used to be in what you call full time, where it's 1 2 3 4 1 2 3 4 bass snare bass snare bass snare bass snare, and songs would be like this. And then somewhere in like the mid to late 60s, people started playing halftime, which gave it a deeper sound, which was instead of 1 2 3 4 1 2 3 4 1 2 3 4 1 2 3 4 1 2 3 4 1, and the music got like this deeper groove to it because the drums were playing half as much, and it made it sound heavier. And I think Waylon was one of the first people in country music to sort of latch on to the power of that, and sometimes they wouldn't even use the snare drum. A lot of times it would just be the bass drum playing along with the bass and just go boom, 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 boom. It was like a march. You think like a marching band with a guy with a bass drum, boom, 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 just like this heartbeat. It didn't have a lot of backbeat. And before that, you listen to country music like in Hank Williams era or up through that, it's all very much on the offbeat, zoom, cha, 1 2 3 4 1. It's got that swing to it that you get with the offbeat. But Waylon's music had this rocky, earthy thing that put it down in the ground that was all about 1 and 3. 1 and 3 and 1 2 3 4 boom, boom, boom. It just basically made the bass sound bigger. And that was kind of a new thing for country music. I think that's part of why he maybe got a little bit of blowback about wanting to, do things his way and all that. I think a lot of people related to it because I think country music has always moved and it's always grown, and there's always been resistance within country music to play it safe and do it the same old way. But at the end of the day, country music, whether we like it or not, is a tributary of pop music. You listen to Bob Wills records and it's frontier fiddle music, but influenced by big band swing. You listen to Hank Williams and you hear those steel parts that Don Helms played. And he said, oh, I was just big into Artie Shaw and, like big band horn sections, those types of lines. Patsy Cline sound was basically, Owen Bradley trying to compete out of Nashville with like Connie Francis and people like that who were making, it was pop music, or Johnny and Jack doing those, Poison Love and Ashes of Love with the Latin beat. That's when the whole rumba craze was going on in popular music, So country music has always been influenced by popular music. And I think that if Waylon hadn't have done it, maybe somebody else would have. Not just like that, though. And it's great that it happened the way that it did, But then with Ralph Mooney put on top of it, again, to bring things back around to Ralph Mooney, just to give it that, that country twangy layer of things, which I don't know what Moon would have really thought about that music, because he was kind of an old world country music person. I don't know if he really, I think he would, have preferred being off to play with Wynn Stewart or someone like that. But what he did with that Waylon sound, when you listen to like Rainy Day Woman or something like that, it's like, man, that's like such a, that heavy with it just makes you want to jump up in the air and go, yeah, country music.
A lot of you guys requested that I tell some Waylon Jennings stories. I think that's a pretty good idea. So today is the day, if you've been waiting for those. Everything that I'm going to tell you is stuff that is in this book right here. This is Waylon's autobiography, written by Waylon Jennings and Lenny Kaye. It was published in 1996, and it is very entertaining. It is, I have to say, I want to say this up front. This is not a how-to book. This is not a manual. This is not how you want to live your life or manage your career. This is more of a cautionary tale. He's really honest. And it's refreshing. There's a lot to like about when you read these stories of Waylon behaving badly and his vices and things like that, the different situations he ended up in. He's pretty honest about it. There's a little bit of macho bravado every now and then. It's kind of a turnoff. but there's a line of honesty through it that I really enjoyed. And I don't know what this originally sold for. It was published in 1996. There's a sticker on the front. Somebody bought it from Half Price Books for $5.98. I bought it from a thrift store for $2. I'm cheap. We've talked about that a few times. But I want to focus today on Waylon's relationship, his friendship with George Jones. Throughout this book, he talks about a lot of different people he was close to, but George Jones was one of the people that he seemed to be able to relate to quite a lot, probably because of the personal vices, the ups and downs of the career, and all of that. But he talks about meeting George when Waylon was a disc jockey, and he asked George if he liked bluegrass music, and George was like, hell no. He said that back then he could see George Jones becoming a rock and roll singer, and he thinks that he would have been really successful if he would have tried that, but George decided to go country. He said there was a night on the Louisiana Hayride when Elvis was appearing on there. This is a big radio show, came out of the South, and George Jones had to play in front of Elvis, and he didn't want to be upstaged by Elvis. So George Jones played the rock and roll, and he did this really rockin' version of Little Richard's Long Tall Sally. And Waylon said he tore it up, and, the crowd liked him better than Elvis that night. That's what Waylon says in the book. But as years went on, they became really close friends, and there's a lot of stories about them getting drunk and partying together. I'm going to read you guys a little section of here. It's telling a story about a night that George Jones came over to Waylon's house and was a little out of control drunk. This is Waylon talking. I'm always happy to help him remember some of his more cantankerous moments, like the evening he came over to visit on a spree and started flailing about in my living room, yelling at Mary Mann, Shooter's grandmother. When it looked as if he might go to sleep, I had the bright idea of giving him a big glass of whiskey to help him nod off. Wrong. He started tearing everything up. I ran into the room and he threw a metal frame picture at my head. It just missed me. If it had landed half a foot to the right, it would have knocked me cold for a week. I tried to get him to calm down, but he kicked me. Finally, I had to sit on him. He played possum on me once, which shows you how he got his nickname, pretending he was choking. When I let go and said, George, you all right? He hit me in the face. I didn't know how much longer this could go on. I was on drugs myself at the time, and after about 30 minutes, I began to get tired. Cocaine doesn't last that long. Jerry Gropp was with me, and he tried to hold down George's feet. George kicked him in the thumb and broke it. It seemed like he was getting stronger, or I was getting weaker. I had no choice but to tie him up, lift him up on the couch, and try to see if he was comfortable. I never felt so bad in my life, thinking, here's the greatest country singer that ever lived, and I'm tying his ass up. Now you be still, I told him. I'm going to call your manager to come pick you up. George sneered at me. I'll get you, you Conway Twitty acting son of a bitch, he said. What does that even mean? You Conway Twitty acting son of a... What's that mean? He says, I'll get you, you Conway Twitty acting son of a bitch, he said. I couldn't hold back a laugh. What do you mean by that? You hit me in the face, and you kicked me in the nuts. You cussed the ladies in my house. You break my guitar player's thumb. And now you call me a Conway Twitty acting son of a bitch? I'm the one who's done to do the getting. Anyway, it goes on. George finally passes out and gets sent home. There's a lot of stories like that in this book. There's stories I'm sure a lot of you guys have heard about when Waylon and Johnny Cash lived together in an apartment in Madison, Tennessee, and that's just outside of East Nashville. A lot of the people are moving there these days that can't afford to live in my old neighborhood of East Nashville. And I've been to this apartment complex and seen the apartment they lived in there. But there was just one bedroom that they both slept in, Johnny Cash and Waylon Jennings sleeping in the same room. It sounded like they just had mattresses on the floor, and when one would come home, they'd have to jump over the other person's body to get to where they sleep. But they were both pilled up like crazy at the time. And I believe Johnny hid his drugs behind the medicine cabinet so Waylon couldn't find them, and Waylon hid his behind the air conditioner so Johnny couldn't find him. But they got along great, and they got to better places in their life, which is the most important thing. But there's a story Waylon tells about when George Jones was on top of the world, for a couple decades. And then there towards the end of the 70s, he was just kind of crashing down, and he was out of money, and he was about to go bankrupt and lose everything. So Waylon and Johnny got together, Waylon and Johnny Cash. They got together and went down to George Jones's bank without him knowing about it. And they talked to somebody there. And there's like, well, what can we do to where he doesn't lose his house, lose his car, lose his tour bus? Got to have a place to live, and he's got to have a way to travel around to make money. And they talked to bank people into letting them pay his bills, but they did it anonymously. They didn't want anybody to know. That was the deal. You can't tell George that we're doing it. Just let him think that some anonymous benefactor did it. And Waylon said John Cash did the same thing for him a little earlier when he was facing the same sort of trouble. So they thought that they would do it without anybody knowing. But, when your bills start getting paid and you don't know how, you probably go to your bank and start asking what the hell's going on. And that's what George Jones did. And somebody at the bank told him that Waylon and Johnny Cash were helping him out. So the word got out that way. But it's great to hear stories about, friends helping each other out, friends that have the means to be able to help somebody get back on their feet, especially people who are suffering substance abuse issues, and maybe they get to a better place in their life. And I'm sure George Jones's career was in a lot better place. I think in 1980, when he Stopped Loving Her Today hit, that probably helped him out quite a lot in a lot of different ways. If you enjoy hearing these kind of stories about Waylon, just let me know, and I'll try to tell more. Like I said, everything that I said came out of this book. A lot of the stuff that I've read in here, I never knew before. It's a lot of great history. There's so much history that gets lost that, unless we pick up these little tidbits and share these stories, people won't know about it. I can only imagine the stories that Waylon didn't tell. Somebody like Waylon walked down so many roads. He witnessed a lot of things from a few different eras. I can only imagine the stories he took to the grave with him. There's an African proverb. I'm going to get this messed up. I apologize, but there's an African proverb that says something to the effect of, when an old man dies, it's like a large library burning to the ground. We lose that information. I think that holds true for Waylon. But if you like these stories, let me know and I'll tell more. If there's one common thread that runs through this book, there's a few threads, but one of them is just Waylon taking a lot of pills and everybody around him taking a lot of pills, and just how you realize how normal that was in Nashville at the time. And he talked about pills as being medicine. He didn't think about it as, getting high or whatever. He thought it was medicine, where you were trying to stay awake because, you've been on this crazy schedule and there's no time to sleep. So you would just take these pills. And it was later in life when he realized just how horrible and destructive and terrible and addictive these pills were, and cost a high price for him and a lot of people, the ultimate price for some people. But I started off with him, with Roger Miller, and I'll read a little bit about his thoughts on Roger Miller for you guys. Almost everybody in Nashville took pills. When Roger Miller and I got to be close, it seemed like washing down a handful of pills was a natural part of life. He was the cleverest and craziest man I ever met. He never quit being funny. No matter how wasted he was, Roger always looked fresh. He might have been up for a week, but you'd never know it. Where some of us would stay in the same clothes for days, he carried a portable iron and always rinsed his shirt in the sink and pressed his pants. Roger Miller had briefcases full of pills, and we had as many names for them as they had colors. Roger took these things called Simcoes, so we called him Roger Simcoe. They were what was known as an over and under. One side was a tranquilizer and the other would be an amphetamine, and they'd even throw in a vitamin with them. There were Johnny White Crosses, Waylon's Phoenix Flashes, some band names for you guys there if you need them. LA turnarounds were the best. We like to say that you could take one and drive to Los Angeles, turn around, and come straight back. Pills were the artificial energy on which Nashville ran around the clock and then some. They were the drug of choice, and for a while it seemed like 80% of the people in that town were comparing notes on who was taking which ones and what they were doing to them. Pill talk. I love the idea of all of these country music stars, going in front of the camera with one hand over a Bible and the other waving a flag. And meanwhile, they're just pilled to the gills, at least 80% of them. And when I look at those old clips, I wonder who the 20% were that weren't doing it. Whenever I meet somebody who was around like back in the day and was on the road in the 50s or 60s and even part of the 70s, I love asking them, what was traveling like? What was it like to be on the road? How did you get from point A to point B in the vehicles you were in? And there were no smartphones, no GPS, no big hotel chains that you could find and rely on. And just imagine what the Chitlin circuit was like, or the honky tonk circuit that Waylon was on, or like a bluegrass circuit, just what that might have been like. But Waylon talks about that in this book quite a bit, and it's really interesting to me. If I can read a little bit, this is Waylon talking. The farther I traveled, the farther in the hole I went. I was having to get advances from RCA to get me transportation. I needed to have something to drive to shows. I was wearing out cars on a monthly basis. It was a form of control to keep us in debt and in their debt. Most of the time, we didn't mind. We were all excited, wide-eyed, and bushy-tailed to be going everywhere. Though if we stopped to notice, it was always the same places, the same people, and for the same money. The band traveled in an old Dodge motorhome. It wasn't a bus. It had belonged to Red Sovine and had been sitting in his backyard. Every hose and tire was ready to give up the ghost. One time, going across the Rockies in Canada, Calgary to Vancouver, the brakes went out. And I'll never forget that night in Red Deer, sleet and ice and snow, and us under the damn motorhome, just trying to unfuse a push-button transmission, get it in drive so we could keep going forward. But we were still in show business. It talks about having a horse trailer that he had put all the gear in and pull it behind this motorhome, and they would hit a bump, and every bit of gear they had would just go flying every which way in the horse trailer. So he'd show up to the gig and have to check the back of his amp and see if his speaker was still mounted in it. Just really rough way to go. He says the sound in the clubs was terrible because there was no PA systems. You never even thought about a monitor. The difference between having good sound and bad sound was whether you could hear anything bouncing off the back wall. Waylon talks about the first time he got to play the Opry, how he was playing with Bobby Bear, and they walk out on stage, and he's standing on those wood floors, the same wood floors that Hank Williams stood on, Ernest Tubb stood on, all these greats that he admired so much, and just sitting back thinking, how in the hell did I ever manage to do this? What am I doing here? That was a nice moment. He said that he was later asked to become a member of the Opry, and he wanted to do it, but part of the problem was if you're a member of the Opry, you're required to play a certain amount of shows a year. I believe it was 20 shows a year, and it was always on Saturday night. But Saturday night is the night that you make the most money on the road, so you would be giving up a lot of money. They offered him $90 to appear on the Opry back in the 60s, and that was, not very much money. In other parts of the book, he'll talk about making, like at least $400 on a date on the road. So he'd be missing out on a lot of money by taking that Opry gig. And 90 was union scale at the time, so he said no. He also talks about Johnny Cash getting to play the Opry. At least I said no peaceably. John Cash had come to the Opry when he got his first record in the top 10 country charts in Billboard. He sat out in the Opry's manager's office for 3 hours, dressed in his black shirt, pants, sideburns, and rockabilly shoes, until they finally relented and let him on the show. He encored 7 times and only had 4 songs out on the market. He sang Hey Porter, Cry, 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 So Doggone Lonesome, and Folsom Prison Blues over and over. Everyone there appeared to love him at the Opry. He was so proud he had torn the Opry up. He joined the Opry but couldn't make most of the Saturdays because he'd be out of work on tours with Jerry Lee Lewis, Carl Perkins, Roy Orbison. So John would do one Saturday and miss 3. Finally, they called him in and said that if he was intended to be a member of the Grand Ole Opry, he'd have to start showing up more. Ultimatums are not the best way to get on John's good side. So he said, well, this will be my last night. At the end of his final song, he dragged the microphone stand across the lights at the edge of the stage, breaking every one of them, one by one. I was just having fun, he told me, watching them pop. The manager of the Opry was less than pleased. He says, you don't have to come back anymore, John. And Johnny Cash says, I don't plan to. But when he got out into the car with June, he started crying, thinking someday they'll want me to come back. Waylon talks about being out on the road, 300 days a year, playing one-nighters and just honky-tonks, and, probably not the most glamorous gigs, and crazy drives. The routing, I don't know who was doing the routing, but all over America and throughout Canada. There's one particular night that he talked about where he had to drive from Minneapolis to Atlanta, gigs on consecutive nights. So he just drove overnight, did a bunch of pills and stayed up. That's 13 hours, I believe, by modern highways. And we're talking about in the late 60s. I don't know that the interstate system was the same. I'm not sure I-65 would have taken you down there. But anyway, I'm going to read one last part to let you know about how sometimes the bad luck caught up with you. On February 9th, 1969, the band was heading to Peoria, Illinois, riding in a pickup that had a sleeper stacked on top of it. You could rest in the back, and one person could fit crosswise over the top of the truck cab in a specially made bunk. I had ordered a Bluebird bus from down in Georgia, but it hadn't been delivered yet. It was to be my first new bus. Richie was in the front and had to let Jimmy Gray start driving. Outside of Bloomington along I-150 on the way to Peoria, they came to an old steel bridge over Kickapoo Creek. It was icy and snowy, and they had to make a sharp right turn. As they slipped on the black ice, the truck shimmied over and leaned a little bit to the side. Walter Chuck Conway, a bass player who had joined me just 11 days before, was asleep in the back compartment over the truck cab. The poor guy never knew what hit him. The pickup made the turn untouched and kept going, but the bridge clipped the sleeper, shattering it and shearing off the alcove. Chuck fell plumb in the river. Richie ran and jumped in after him, but he was too late. They said there wasn't a bone in his head that wasn't broken, and he died at the scene. Stu Allen Punske, a keyboard player, was also badly hurt. I was traveling behind them in a Cadillac an hour or two after. When I came on the scene, it scared me to death. The police found pot in the pickup, but when I went down to the hospital, those cops showed me the bag of marijuana and said, Waylon, you got enough problems. We're going to throw this away. So a terrible, horrible incident that leads into one paragraph about Merle Haggard that some of you guys had mentioned in the comments. This is one paragraph out of an entire book. Merle's name is mentioned 2 other times, and nothing is said about him at all. But this one paragraph says a lot. I'm not completely sure what to make of it, so I'll just simply read it to you and let you guys decide. It scared me, made me feel responsible, even though there was nothing I could have done. We played the date using Hank Snow's bass player, and I was just wobbling around on pills and drunk. Merle Haggard and his manager, Fuzzy Owens, got me in a poker game and cleaned me out. I had $4,000 or $5,000 on me, and they won everything. They were there to get my money. That was it. I think Merle is a great singer and songwriter, and probably he was in a bad shape as I was, but we've never been close since that night. I can still remember their faces. When I was broke, they said their goodbyes and left, and I never forgot that. That's in 1969. I don't know what to make of that. I have to believe there was maybe some backstory to that, and I don't know. If you guys know something that I don't, it's a sad thing to hear. I've also played poker quite a few times, never for those stakes, but I know that you don't sit down with money without being willing to lose it. But I would like to think that friends might entertain themselves in a different way. I don't know what to make of that. I would like to, Merle Haggard wrote his biography, later after that. I haven't read it, but hopefully he addressed that maybe in that book. I don't know, man. There's a lot of darkness in Waylon's story, and that's a pretty dark moment right there. But I hope you guys get something from this. I hope that all of this talk of pills and stuff is not glorifying it, because I don't feel that way at all. That's not how I look at it. I have no use for any of that crap in my life. But it's interesting to hear these stories. And it's also interesting to think of this as medicine, just like people who once thought cigarettes were healthy. That's an interesting way to think about it. I don't know what I think about that, but tell me what you think about it. And tell me what your favorite Waylon song is. We'll talk about something happier. Talk about the music. That's the important part of Waylon's legacy, the artistry. That's the thing you want to emulate, the artistry, the man who stood up for a record to sound the way he thought it should sound, and not what, the industry wanted it to be. The rest of this stuff is just crazy stories. All right. I hope you guys are taking care of each other, and much love to each other. Or much love to you. Here's to better days.